is George. I thought I'll just do a PowerPoint on background information related to Euripides' play Women of Troy, because without knowing the background, it is really hard to understand the text. So this is a long slide, which is almost 55. We have got almost 55 slides here, but in this PowerPoint, I'll be dealing with lots of background, not just the textual background. I'll be dealing with the dramatical background, mythological background. So I'll be dealing with a lot in this PowerPoint. So when you look at this slide, I think you will get a good understanding about the background of the text written by Euripides. So let us look into the slides. I always want you to look into the background, like in the sense, where does this text, Euripides' play, Women of Troy, where does this exist? So when you look into that, I thought we have to look back to the three types of Greek drama. As you know, there are three types of a Greek drama. The first one is comedy, second one tragedy, and the third one is satire plays. Comedy, the first comedians were mainly satirical, and they actually mocked men in power for their vanity and foolishness. And one of the important master of the comedy is actually the playwright Aristophanes. Some of you might have heard about Aristophanes. And the second category of the Greek drama is actually the tragedy. Tragedy actually deals with big themes like love, loss, pride, abuse of power, etc. And the three great tragedians are mainly Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. And out of this, you clearly know who we are going to focus, and it's definitely Euripides. And the third type of Greek drama is actually satire plays. These are short plays which were actually performed between the acts of tragedies, and they actually made fun of the tragic characters. So these are the three types of Greek dramas: comedy, tragedy, and satire plays. Next one, I've got tragedy, because out of those three, as you know, since we are focusing on the text Euripides' Women of Troy, we are just focusing on the second category, tragedy. So tragedy is actually a kind of drama that presents a very serious subject matter. It can be about human suffering and the corresponding terrible events related to that. And they deal with all these events in a very dignified manner. And when you think about tragedies, there are two types of tragedies: classical Greek tragedy and Shakespearean tragedy. I'm sure you will be able to guess Women of Troy belongs to which type of tragedy. Definitely it belongs to classical Greek tragedy. So that's why I have got this slide specifically for classical Greek tragedy. We are going to forget about Shakespearean tragedy now because we are focusing on Women of Troy, which actually comes under classical Greek tragedy. So when you think about the term tragedy, it has got a Greek origin dating back to the 5th century BC. Generally, it is understood that the word actually comes from the classical Greek word tragedia, which actually means God's song. It was a name actually assigned by the Greeks to specific forms of play performed mainly on the festivals in Greece. And when you think about that festival, even the local governments supported that festival. And the mood surrounding the presentation of these plays was that actually of a religious ceremony, because the entire community, along with the grand priest, will attend the performance. So this was actually supported by the local government. And Greek tragedies were mainly performed in late March and early April, at an annual state religious festival, mainly in honor of Dionysius. Some of you may know that Dionysius is actually the god of grape and harvest and winemaking. So in order to honor the god Dionysius, they actually performed this religious festival, mainly in honor of Dionysius. So you have to keep that in mind. Why was this Greek tragedy, and where were these tragedies performed? And why do they perform this? Mainly to honor the Greek god of Dionysius. So keep that in mind. And the subject matter, as I told you before, subject matter for the Greek tragedies were actually derived chiefly from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. If you don't know who Homer is, he is believed to be the ancient Greek to have been the greatest. He is one of the greatest epic poets. belongs to, the nationality is definitely Greek. So he is a Greek writer, and he has written the epic poems like Iliad and Odyssey. So most of the subject matters in tragedy were actually taken from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And those epic poems actually included misfortunes of heroes of history, as well as even religious mythologies. They deal with religious mythologies. So the influence, or the Euripides and other tragedians, they actually got the elements mainly from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, which is actually the epic poems. And the main source of our knowledge of the Trojan War is Homer's Iliad, written sometime in 8th century BC. So where he actually recounts 52 days during the final year of the 10-year conflict. Now I mentioned the 10-year conflict. We are going to refer to that in our Women of Troy, mainly the Trojan War and the aftermath of that. So you have to keep in mind about these three Greek dramatists and their timeline. Aeschylus 525 to 456 BC, Sophocles 496 to 406 BC, and our focus is mainly on Euripides, so 480 to 406 BC. So keep that in mind. And when you think about the word tragedy, you should definitely know the definition of tragedy, mainly the definition given by the philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle, he has written lots of books, and in one of his famous work called Poetics, he has actually given us the definition of tragedy. And in that Poetics, Aristotle says that tragedy is actually an imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of a certain magnitude, in language embellished with each kind of artistic ornament, the several kinds being found in separate parts of the play, in the form of action, not of narrative, through pity and fear, effecting the proper purgation of these emotions. I still remember I had to, while I was learning this, we had to memorize this definition, because it's really an important definition, and we actually get a lot of ideas about tragedy in that special definition. So keep that in mind. I'll try and unpack this definition for you in the next slides. So here is the definition, and I've picked some of the important words. One is, it says tragedy is an imitation. Imitation means, the Greek word for imitation is actually mimesis. Imitation means it is attempt to capture the essence of reality. We are trying to capture the essence of reality, but in a very artificial form. Okay, so we are trying to get the essence of that reality, but in an artificial form. And that kind of representation, that is called imitation. That kind of mimicking is called imitation. And the Greek word for that is mimesis. So keep that, learn that Greek word as well. And the second one is to evoke pity and fear. In the definition, it says tragedy should evoke pity and fear. Pity, the Greek word is ilios. Pity is actually the feeling of pain one experiences when we actually watch, while watching, especially when we see someone else is suffering. So we feel pity for them. In our play, Women of Troy, we feel pity for the women of Troy. So that Aristotle always believed that for a tragedy to be really good, it should evoke pity in the mind of the readers or in the mind of the audience. And it's not just pity, it should evoke fear as well. Greek word for fear is phobos, which is actually the sense of panic or loss in self-terror, loss of self in actually terror. And another word is purgation. Aristotle talked about purgation. Purgation, the Greek word for purgation is actually catharsis. Catharsis means, or purgation means, it's like a cleansing or purging of our soul. Because Aristotle says that in our mind there are so many emotions which are actually stagnant in our mind. But when we see tragedies like this, we actually, for example, when you see the pathetic situation of Hecuba, or when you see the horrific situation where Astyanax has been taken away from Andromache, we feel sad for them. And we sometimes, when we watch, for example, when you watch a film, sometimes when you see a sad moment, you cry, and your emotions are actually evoked in that particular sense. And so our emotions should be evoked. And if it is evoked, we actually cry. Or if you see a happy moment, we sometimes laugh. So our emotions are cleansed because it is coming out. Otherwise, it will be stagnant in mind, stagnant in our mind. And Aristotle says that these kinds of emotions are really harmful, especially if it is stagnant in our mind, it is really harmful. So we have to cleanse our mind, purify our mind. And that process of purification is actually called catharsis. So catharsis means purifying or purging. Another word is purging or cleansing, as when something is forcefully removed from our mind. So this implies that tragedy purges harmful emotions like pity and fear from the body. So it's just like I still remember one of my teachers actually taught me about this purgation. It's like a tank where the water is actually overflowing. So our emotions are actually overflowing, just like the water which is actually full and overflowing from the tank. So it is always good to evoke that pity and mind. So according to Aristotle, a good tragedy will always evoke pity and fear in the mind of the body. And that particular process of purging or cleansing our emotion is called catharsis. So you have to keep all these words in your mind. So to try and understand the definition of tragedy, and try and use especially all these words, especially in your to get a meta language, you could use all these words. Another important thing that you need to remember when you learn this text is about the Aristotelian unities or classical unities. Aristotle, the great philosopher, he actually says that every play or every work should follow the unities: unity of action, unity of time and place. And the first one he says is unity of action, which means he says that a work or theatre should have a single plot focus. So a play should have just one main action with few or even no subplots, and that's called unity of action. And the second thing that he says is action should occur in real time, or at least over no more than 24 hours, which means the action of the play should cover a duration of no more than 24 hours. And that's called unity of time. It should be in a limited time. And the stage should represent a single location, he says. And that's the third thing he says: unity of place, that it shouldn't locate the play shouldn't talk about the different geographical areas. It shouldn't compress the geographical area. The play should focus mainly, it should take place in a single location, and that's called unity of place. So unity of action is a play that has one main action. Unity of time means the action of the play should cover a duration of no more than 24 hours, and unity of play means the play should cover just a single physical space. It shouldn't constrain or compress the geography. And these unities actually result in a play which holds emotional as well as intellectual focus, and that narrows the audience's attention on the playwright's views and values and purposes. Otherwise, people will be they'll be confused a lot, and they couldn't focus really well on the authorial views and values. And this format was actually very common in ancient Greece, and later on in 16th century, there was a resurgence of the use of all these unities. And when you think about the text Women of Troy, you could actually see that Women of Troy is conforming to all these three Aristotelian unities. It conforms to the unity of action, unity of time, and unity of place. And here, this is all about elements of tragedy. I've got a PowerPoint on elements of tragedy. I will talk about elements of tragedy as a separate PowerPoint, because you need to know about the elements of tragedy. So I will have a separate PowerPoint for elements of tragedy. Now, when you think about the writer Euripides is actually born in Athens, Greece, around 485 BC, and he became one of the best known and most influential dramatists in classical Greek culture. It says, history says that he wrote almost 95 plays approximately, and only 18 to 19 have actually survived. And of those 19, 16 are tragedies. That's why we are actually calling Euripides as a great tragedian. And his tragedies actually explore with ancient myths and legends that were traditionally the subject matter of any Greek drama. However, his approach to these legends signaled a departure from the approaches of tragedians such as Aeschylus and Sophocles. So he was actually different. He had different views. Euripides actually used, as I told you before, Homer's ancient tales of male heroism to underscore the plight of women and slaves, and to deliver criticisms and warnings to his audience. So when you look into the text, I'll talk more about this. And you could say that Euripides even reshaped the structure of a tragedy by portraying strong female characters. Because in the text Women of Troy, we could actually see strong women characters. We could see intelligent slaves sometimes in some other texts. So he even tries, sometimes he make fun of the heroes of Greek mythology. So he actually reshaped the structure of tragedy, and he is different to other tragedians. And as a last point, second last point, I have written Euripides' greatest works, Alcestis, Medea, Trojan Women, or it has got different names. Either you could call it as Trojan Women or Women of Troy, the Bacchae. And Euripides actually died in 406 BC. And when you think about the body of work of Euripides, you have to remember Euripides, when Euripides' plays are sequenced in time, they also reveal that his outlook might have changed, providing a spiritual biography along these lines. So his work is divided into his own life, career, and his own life. So the first type, or the first career line, is an early period of high tragedy time. The second one is a patriotic period at the outset, it's mainly at the outset of the Peloponnesian War. And there is a third middle period of disillusionment and senselessness of war. I have highlighted that particular body of work, or that particular sequence, because I feel that Women of Troy is actually placed in that period when he was actually having a disillusionment, or when he actually thought about the senselessness, hopelessness of war. And again, in Women of Troy, we could actually see that kind of senselessness and hopelessness of war. And definitely that is what Euripides is trying to show. And the fourth type is like an escapist period with a focus on romantic intrigue. So after he wrote about senselessness of war, he is trying to escape from that world of hopelessness and senselessness, and he is focusing more on a romantic intrigue. And the final period is of tragic despair. So his life is actually, or the plays written by Euripides actually mirrors his own lifetime and his own views towards his own life. So keep that in mind. Now, when you think about Euripides, we could call him different. We could say that sometimes Euripides is a pacifist. A pacifist is actually a person who believes that war and violence are unjustifiable, that they couldn't justify war, who is actually opposed to war. So we could say that Euripides is actually a pacifist, because 5th century Athens was actually a time of great conflict. Euripides used his craft to campaign against war. 2 years after Euripides' death, Athens actually fell to the Spartans. Euripides used theatre as a vehicle for education. He was actually viewed, as a result, he was viewed as a non-conformist. He's not conforming to the tragedians, non-conformist. And we could even call that, or we could even say that Euripides is a pacifist, who is opposed to war. And that might be the reason why, through his play Women of Troy, he's trying to show the hopelessness and senselessness of war. And now we could also call him proto-feminist. Proto-feminism, I don't know whether you have heard about that term, proto-feminism. Proto-feminism is actually a philosophical tradition that actually anticipates modern feminism in an era when the concept of feminism was still unknown, that is even before the 19th or 20th century. So proto-feminist, we could call him as a proto-feminist, someone who supports feminist views, of someone who supports females. Euripides treats his female characters with great sympathy, as well as portraying them as independent and intelligent. Therefore, this has actually led to the interpretation that Euripides is actually a feminist for his general portrayal of women, because mainly he's showing them as independent characters and intelligent characters. So we could say that he is in a way supporting the feminist views and feminism and females. So we could call him, because he was living in an age before the philosophy of feminism came into the world, we could call him as a proto-feminist. And we could also say that he is a non-conformist. When I said non-conformist means a person who does not conform to prevailing ideas or practices in their behavior or views. So remember that you could look into Euripides' Women of Troy using different lenses. So keep all those in mind and try and learn these words so that you can actually utilize this in your play, in your analysis, sorry. We could also say that he is like a blasphemer. Blasphemy, it's an act of insulting or disrespecting a deity or a god. So Euripides was actually not a great believer in the gods. While even though he opens Women of Troy with a conversation between two gods, Poseidon, the god of sea, and Athena, goddess of wisdom, still he uses them more as an informative tool to shape the prologue. And as the play progresses, you could see that the main protagonist, Hecuba, actually shifts from singing praises to the gods. And she is actually shifting her view and she becomes nihilistic and resentful of the faith she once placed in gods. She had great faith in God, she praised God, but later we could see that there is a shift in her focus. And from singing praises, she is becoming very resentful towards faith. So nihilism is actually the rejection of all religious and moral principles. So can we even consider Euripides as a nihilist? So you can, it's up to you to interpret, guys. So if you are, it's okay for you to look through all these lenses, but make sure that you are having enough evidence to back up your points. Now, because he is of feminist, pacifist, and blasphemous views, we could even call him as an iconoclastic playwright. It's a good term to use, iconoclast. Iconoclast means someone who actually attacks cherished ideas or traditional institutions. Here, I told you before, he is a nonconformist and he's trying to attack the cherished ideas. So in a way, we could call that, or we could say that Euripides is an iconoclastic playwright because he actually subverts and challenges the established beliefs and norms of his society and the myths and legends that comprise their belief structure. He's trying to overturn all that. He even subverts and challenges the established beliefs. So when you think in that way, we could call him as an iconoclast. So we could say that Euripides can be considered as an iconoclastic and unconventional dramatist. Now, let us focus more into the text, the Trojan women. Now we have looked at the background, a bit of the background of the author. Now let us talk a bit more about Trojan women, women of Troy. Trojan women is actually a tragedy centering on the horror of war and the aftermath of war. The play opens at the end of the 10-year Trojan War. We could actually see how the play starts. The play is actually opening with the end of the 10-year Trojan War. Trojan is actually, when you think about the word Trojan, because the title is Women of Troy and Trojan, or when you think about the other title Trojan women, what do you mean by Trojan? Trojan is actually an adjective referring to persons or places and things in the ancient city of Troy. Ancient city of Troy is actually situated west of the Aegean Sea in Asia Minor, now part of present-day Turkey. So Euripides calls a Trojan. When you think about the word Trojan, Trojan refers to the people. Trojan women means women in Troy. So that is the meaning of that word. Euripides actually debuted the Trojan women in Athens in 415 BC at the theatre on the south side of Acropolis. And I told you the occasion was actually Great Dionysia, festival of Great Dionysia, especially honoring the god of wine, Dionysius. Now let us look into the dramatical context a bit because we need to understand the dramatical context to understand the understand the women of Troy. Theatre, when you think about theatre in ancient Greece, that was not simply about entertainment. Drama was more like a political tool. And one of the aims of the playwright, one of the aims of the playwriting was actually to educate citizens, the practice of having good citizenship. So we could say that the plays were actually didactic, intended to teach. Didactic means intended to teach, particularly in having moral instructions as an ulterior motive. So we could say that through his play Women of Troy, Euripides is actually trying to give us a lesson, or teach us a lesson about the senselessness and hopelessness of war. So we could, in a way, say that the text Women of Troy is actually it's written by Euripides mainly as a didactic text to teach us something. Now, this is mainly a repetition. Festival of Dionysius, I've already mentioned that in the other slides, but Festival of Dionysius, I'll repeat it again. It was mainly to honor Dionysius, the god of wine. And in order to attend that festival, people came from all over the Greek world. Every year in the spring, around March, playwrights, they would compete to entertain the masses in Athenian society. So people came from all over the Greek world. And every year, as I told you in spring, around March, playwrights would compete to entertain the masses of Athenian citizenry. And as many Athenian citizens actually came there to view the festival of Dionysius. And one thing you need to remember is when I say citizens, it excludes women and slaves. I will talk about more of that in the coming slides. Again, dramatical context, as I told you before, during the festival of Dionysius, 3 playwrights per year were allowed to submit their plays to be performed, especially on that festival day. 3 playwrights. Every year, 3 playwrights have had the permission to submit their plays. So each one, they should write 3 tragedies and 1 satire play. They should write 3 tragedies and a satire play. All of the plays performed by one playwright, they were actually performed in a single day. And that is why we have got a 3-day competition, because we have got three writers, because on one day they'll be doing 3 tragedies and a satire play. So for example, if it is Euripides' day, then he should do 3 tragedies and he should do 1 satire play. And when you think about the competition, it's more about competing for glory, more so than money. It's more about the glory. It's more about the power and the status rather than money. And as I told you before, the audience, when you think about the audience, it will be just male audience, male actors and male playwrights. See, there's not even a single role for women. If there is a women character, then the men will be actually putting masks, and they'll be young males will be doing that role. So even the audience, even women were not allowed as an audience. So it's male centered. As I told you, it's patriarchal society. It's male centered. Male audience, male actors, and even male playwrights. Therefore, I think it will be mostly representing male views and values. But remember, when you think about Women of Troy, we have got women characters. And again, that might be the reason why Euripides was very unpopular during that time. And that might be the reason why Euripides actually won only the 2nd prize for Women of Troy in the Festival of Dionysius. He didn't win the 1st prize. That might be one reason, because he is introducing strong female characters. The source of the play, I told you mainly the source of the play is from Homer's The Legends, the myths and legends about the Trojan War, which is actually dealt in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. So mainly archaeological and historical evidence suggests that the war actually took place probably between 350 to 1100 BC. So, however, ancient storytellers mythologized the events before, during, and after the war, saying gods and goddesses took sides and even intervened in battles to affect the outcome of the war and the fates of the heroes. The storytellers also exaggerated or fabricated the deeds of the Greek and Trojan warriors. So the main source of the play for all the tragedians will be Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Best performance, Women of Troy, also known as Trojan Women or Troiads, was actually performed as a part of tetralogy. When I say tetralogy, it is mainly 3. There's 3 tragedies. As I told you, one author should give 3 tragedies and 1 satire play. So 3 tragedy is actually a trilogy. 3 refers to trilogy, 3 tragedies, plus a satire play, which is like a tragicomedy. And that is how it forms tetralogy. Tetra means 4. So tetralogy during the festival of Great Dionysius. The first was Alexander, which told the story of Paris' reunion with his parents. So the first tragedy written by Euripides is Alexander, which actually talks about stories of Paris' reunion with his parents Priam and Hecuba. We need to know a bit of background of Paris as well. I'll be dealing with that later. And this is important as Paris' return to Troy brought about the city's prophesied destruction. And second tragedy written by Euripides is Peloponnesian, which actually revealed how Odysseus framed a Greek rival, Palamedes, demonstrating the Greeks' capacity to behave ignobly. And the last play is actually Women of Troy. So on that day, when Euripides performed his 3 plays, he performed Alexander, Palamedes, the Women of Troy, and the satire plays. Considered together, these plays would have conveyed clear messages to the Athenian audience about the consequences of poor choices and immoral behavior. Now, when you think about the setting of the play Women of Troy, the action actually takes place before the walls of Troy. I told you the play actually begins when the 10-year war actually ends. So in the very first scene, we could actually see the ruins of Troy. The play begins at dawn on a day after Greek armies actually won the Trojan War. We know that the Greeks actually won the Trojan War. I'll give you a bit of background about Trojan War in the coming slides. So in the setting of the Women of Troy is mainly Troy, and we could see Troy in complete ruin. It is in ruins. Corpses, dead bodies lie unburied on the battlefield in front of the city. Trojan women, we could actually see Trojan women, including Hecuba, the queen of Troy, congregate outside the walls of the city in deep despair, and they are to become slaves of the victorious Greeks. So that is the setting. So setting is in front of the walls of Troy, before the walls of Troy. Now, you have to understand a bit about the historical background and the context of the play. When you think about the historical and political background, ancient Greece and Athens particularly is considered as the birthplace of democracy. You know what a democracy is: democratic country of the play, of the people, by the people, and for the people. So ancient Greece or Athens is particularly considered as the birthplace of democracy. And in the 6th century BC, Athenian citizens, they became a strong political force. They formed a constitution and they instituted equal rights for citizens. Many other city-states in ancient Greece soon adapted the Athenian model of government in varying forms. And when you think about their political system, no party system, no elected politicians. And they said that any citizen could speak in Athenian assembly. Anyone could vote and serve on juries. But even though they said anyone, Athenian citizenship though was limited to Athenian men who actually completed their compulsory training, military training. And in that, women, slaves, and foreigners, they were considered as non-citizens. So think about that democratic country. They're calling it democratic country, but again, and they're talking about equal rights for citizens, but they're not even considering women and slaves and foreigners as citizens. Wealth and land ownership continued to determine one's power within that society. Theatre and democracy were intrinsically linked, and the festival of Dionysius, as I told you before, is very political. It was political. This was the political system in which actually EURIPIDES lived. And imagine writing a play, especially when women were not even citizens, writing a play titled Women of Troy, and showing the intelligence and showing or focusing mainly on a women character. You could actually imagine why he lost the first prize in the Festival of Dionysius. This particular slide is mainly to focus on women. The behavior of Greek women was strictly controlled by social convention. In year 11, you might have studied the play Medea. Women were not counted as citizens, and therefore they had no right to vote. They could not engage in any kind of transactions involving property. This prevented women from gaining any influence or authority in political and economic operation. Women in ancient Greece, they were denied the freedom to choose who they want to marry. They were particularly restricted in participating in any kind of outside events. As I told you, in order to watch the performance of the play, women were not allowed. They were not even allowed to leave the house without their husband or father's explicit consent. So if it is after marriage, it is her husband's consent. So without that consent, they are not even allowed to go out of their home. That was the situation during that time. That was the situation of women during that time. Now, Euripides was actually born in Athens in 485 BC, and his homeland has been at war throughout his entire life. So nearly everyone in his audience would have fought in battle. So anyone who is coming to see the performance, all the audience, they would have fought in battle, any battle. So it was actually it was part of the very fabric of ancient Greek identity. Warfare played a constant and significant role in the development of Greek culture. Everyone was used to war. The Greek warrior is located among the largest artifacts, buildings, and statues, and among even the smallest coins. You could actually see that. So much of a boy's education and role in Athenian society was actually influenced by warfare during that time. Although paid education varied depending upon the financial status of the parent, most boys whose parents could afford to pay for an education learned the fundamentals of fighting. So Euripides was actually used to, or he grew up in such kind of a world where he has seen war, a lot of wars. Now, this is just a map which actually show about the places discussed in the play. You could actually see where Troy is. Look at Athens. You could see Sparta, and you could see the Milos, the island. So that all comes in later in the discussion. So keep that will be a handy map that you could use. Now, when you think about, I told you about war. Euphrates has actually seen a lot of war. So what was happening? What kind of conflict was happening in ancient Greece? To understand the women of Troy in context, it is important to appreciate the prolonged history of the Athenian conflict during that period. You have to understand what was actually happening during that period. So in 431 BC, the powerful city-states, there are two powerful city-states, Athens and Sparta, they entered into a conflict that would continue until 4 or 5 BC. And when Sparta conquered Athens, and they became the supreme power in ancient Greece. Thus, women of Troy was first staged in 415 BC. Athens, during that time, Athens has been at war for almost 16 years. And in that time, Athens had come under attack from Sparta at least 5 times, while also waging war against other democracies. So that was a conflict that was happening in ancient Greece during that time. So you need to know a bit about Peloponnesian War. There are different wars: Greco-Persian War, First Peloponnesian War, Second Peloponnesian War. So the Peloponnesian War was fought in ancient Greece, as I told you before, between two states, two powerful city-states, Athens and Sparta. And this war actually shifted power from Athens to Sparta, making Sparta the most powerful city-state in the region. Athens actually wanted Milos, technically an ally to Sparta, and to take its side in the Peloponnesian War, but Melians refused. So Athens wanted Milos, people in Milos, to support them, but Melians refused. So in the winter of 415 BC, a few months before Women of Troy was presented at the festival of Dionysius, Athenians committed an atrocity which actually disfigured the Peloponnesian War. So what happened is the Athenians, they launched an unprovoked siege on Milos. They killed all the Melian men of military age, and they enslaved the Melian women and children. So that's what Athens have done during that time. So therefore, it is understood that Women of Troy, written by Euripides, is actually a way of holding a mirror up to the Athenians and providing a condemnation of their actions, mainly during the Peloponnesian War. So you have to understand the background of all this to really appreciate the play Women of Troy. Now, conflict in Greece, especially, there are two key events that are important to the context of Women of Troy. The first one, as I told you briefly in the other slide, is the siege of Milos. So in 416 BC, what happened is Athens, they demanded from the island of Milos. Milos, I told you, it's an island. So Athens demanded from the island of Milos a contribution of men or money in order to help them in the Peloponnesian War. But the Melians, they were actually friends to Spartans, and they asked to be allowed to remain neutral. In response, what Athens did is Athens asserted its military power by attacking Milos, and that's called the Siege of Milos. And the Athenians, they slaughtered, as I told you before, they slaughtered all the male inhabitants, they sold the women and children into slavery. And this act caused bitter controversy in the Athenian assembly. And it is possible that Euripides brought the Trojan women to protest the incursion against Milos. Another one is Sicilian expedition. Athenian assembly, dominated by the war party, had approved an expedition to attack Syracuse in modern Sicily in 415 BC. Women of Troy was actually performed as final preparations were being made for this military expeditions. Athenians, they suffered a bitter defeat in the conflict that followed. So, Siege of Milos and Sicilian expedition were the conflicts that were happening during that time. Here I've got a character map which is not very clear. I'll try and make it clear later on. I'll try and give you a better version of this. But this is, I have color-coded it into different ones. The first one is the Trojans part, the orange one, and the pink. The pink color is mainly for the Greeks. So I've actually put the characters in two different sides separately. So when you think about Trojans, when you think about the city of Troy, we have got King Priam and we have got Queen Hecuba. King is Priam or Priam, and Queen is Hecuba. And they have got, we are dealing with 2 sons and 2 daughters of Priam and Hecuba. We have got 1 son, Hector, and Hector is married to Andromache, and they have got Astyanax. Second son is Paris. He's also called as Alexander, and we know that Helen is with Paris at the time of the play. We know that Helen belongs to Greece, but at the moment Helen has married Paris, and we don't know the background about that. And the daughter is actually Cassandra. One daughter is Cassandra, and the other one is Polyxena. So 2 sons and 2 daughters. We are mainly dealing with Hector, Paris, and Cassandra and Polyxena. When you think about Greeks, the other side, we have got, we are starting with Atreus and Erop. I'll make it a bit more clear later on, guys. Atreus and Erop, they have got 2 sons. One is Menelaus, who is actually king of Sparta, Menelaus. And his wife is Helen. See, Helen is actually the queen of Sparta. And now, where is Helen? In Trojan with Paris at the start of the play. Now, other son is Agamemnon. Agamemnon is the second son. So Menelaus and Agamemnon, they are brothers. And there is another Greek island which is called Ithaca. And the king of Ithaca is actually Odysseus. And we have got the wife as, or queen as Penelope. So there are references to these people as well. So that's why I have written it there. There are so many other Greek warriors who have been referred to in the play. We have got Achilles, we have got Neoptolemus, we have got Ajax, Odysseus, Agamemnon. So we will see all of them in detail later. Mythological background. So Trojan War, mythological background. In the ancient Mediterranean world of the 2nd millennium BC, feminine beauty actually reaches its zenith in Helen, who is actually the wife of Menelaus, the king of Grecian state of Sparta. Her wondrous face and body are without flaw, and she is perfect. And even the goddess of love, Aphrodite, admires her. So what happened is, one day, Aphrodite competes with other goddesses. There are 2 other goddesses as well, Hera and Athena, in a beauty contest in which the winner is to receive a golden apple. It's called an apple of discord. So in that competition, they decided that the winner of the contest will actually get the apple of discord. And the judge is actually young Trojan named Paris. I told you Paris is the son of King Priam and Hecuba. So he is the judge. He is a very young guy at that time, so he's going to be the judge. Now, Aphrodite, what did Aphrodite do? The goddess of love. Aphrodite tells him that if Paris is going to select her, that means Aphrodite, she will award him the most ravishing woman in the world. So that's the promise of Aphrodite, goddess of love. So Aphrodite says to Paris that, see, if in this beauty contest, if you're going to select me as the winner, I will give you a prize. I'll give you the most beautiful woman in the world. So finally, Paris chooses Aphrodite. So she tells him about, and so Aphrodite is a winner in that contest, and as a result, Aphrodite is talking about Spartan princess Helen, who is actually daughter of Zeus and wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. So Paris is actually Paris is introduced to Helen there, and Helen is actually we don't know whether she eloped with Paris or whether they got married. Anyway, they were together after that, and that created the conflict between the Trojans and Sparta, and that's why the Spartan king Menelaus was really angry, and they started fighting each other. Mythological background again, Menelaus, who was actually angry, he convinces his brother Agamemnon. I told you Agamemnon is Menelaus' brother. So Menelaus was really angry about Helen, not just to Helen, even to the Trojans. And the Greek hero Achilles, Odysseus' Nestor and Ajax, with the help of all these Spartan people, he tried to retrieve his wife. And they, accompanied by a fleet of more than 1,000 ships, they lay siege to Troy, and they demand that King Priam, the Trojan king, to return Helen. So they started the fight, and their demand was to return Helen. So when you think about the city of Troy, the city of Troy is actually protected by a high wall around the city. Some parts of the wall are even 20 feet high. There were gates in the wall to let people in, but it provided great defense for the people of Troy. So it gave the Trojan warriors a relatively safe place to stand while they rained arrows on the people below who were trying to break in the city. So at the time of the story, Greek warriors had been trying to breach the wall around Troy for almost 10 years. And the Greeks could not find a way in, and the Trojans did not seem to be able to drive the Greeks away. So that was the situation. They were fighting for almost 10 years, and the Greeks could not find a way. Now, after 10 years of fighting, Odysseus, a very famous ancient Greek general, conceives a plan to end the war. And his plan is, he planned, we will make a large wooden horse, and they decided that they will leave the large wooden horse outside the gates of Troy. Because at that time it was a custom to leave a peace offering behind to admit the defeat. So the Greek warrior Odysseus actually suggested the Greeks could build a very huge, heavy, and very beautiful wooden horse, and that they could leave it outside the gates of Troy, saying that, okay, we are going now, everything is going to be peaceful. So then the entire Greek army would pretend. So their plan is the entire Greek army, they would pretend to leave as if they were headed home. But actually it was a trick by Odysseus. His plan was to build a big horse, and the horse would be actually hollow. So 30 men would be hiding inside that wooden horse. And the very best Greek artists got busy. They started carving the giant wooden horse, adding great detail, because everything in the Greek world, as you know, should be perfect and beautiful. So when they finished creating the beautiful wooden Trojan horse, the Greek warriors pretended to sail away, leaving the horse behind in front of the Trojan, in front of Troy. And what did the people of Troy do? The people of Troy, they rushed outside, cheering their victory. And ignoring the warnings of prophetess Cassandra, the Trojans brought the horse into the gates. They opened the gates and they moved the Trojan horse into their inside Troy. See, Cassandra, you're going to see Cassandra. She is a prophetess and she has got visions. And she even warned not to do that. But ignoring the warnings of prophetess Cassandra, they brought in the horse. And at nightfall, Greek soldiers, they emerged from the horse. So when some of the Greeks have already left, they pretended that they're going to leave. And at nightfall, the Greek soldiers actually emerged from this hollow horse. They opened the gates to allow the Greek armies inside, and they went and opened the gates, and they invited all the armies, the Greek armies, and that completely overwhelmed the Trojans. Having defeated the Trojans, the Greek fleet sets off for home. Now they have won the war. The Spartans have won the war using their trickery. However, on their way back, the ships were scattered in a storm, and most of the men were drowned. Well, many of the survivors took years to reach their homes. We in Homer's Odyssey, we could actually read that Odysseus, the Spartan leader, is actually taking almost 10 years to arrive at home back in his island Ithaca. And notably, Helen returned to Sparta with Menelaus, and they continued to reign. So in the play Women of Troy, Euripides actually tells the story of these captives, the city captives and women, the women especially in Troy. I've got a link towards the fleet sail, so you can have a look at it later. Now, about Paris, as I told you, Paris is the son of King Priam and Hecuba. And now, what is the background of Paris? Paris is one of the most famous mortals from Greek mythology because he is actually blamed for bringing about the destruction of one of the most famous cities in the ancient world. We know that Troy is one of the famous cities, and the whole city was actually destroyed because of Paris. Paris' love for Helen. So he is blamed. So that's why I told you he's the most infamous mortals from Greek mythology. Paris, of course, came from Troy, and his abduction of Helen from Sparta is the reason why 1,000 ships, all packed with heroes and men, arrived at gates of Troy, and ultimately the city of Troy would fall to that force. So Paris was more than just an inhabitant of Troy, though, for he was a prince of the city. So he is actually the prince of the city, the son of King Priam and wife Hecuba. So there was a prophecy during his birth. If we go back a bit, there was a prophecy during the birth of Paris. A myth appears in the stories of ancient Greece about the birth of Paris. For when pregnant, Hecuba had a premonition of Troy being destroyed by a flaming torch or brand. So she had a premonition that Troy is going to be destroyed. So she had a premonition. And this newborn son was, of course, Paris, who was also referred to as Alexander, just as Cassandra. So Cassandra is a sister. She is also known as Alexandria. And as I told you before, Paris is also known as Alexander. So when the baby Alexander, when baby Paris was born, though, neither Priam nor Hecuba could bring themselves to kill their son, their own son. And it's really hard to kill one's own son. Instead, what did they do? They abandoned him, and they saw a servant, Agelaus, who was actually charged with the task. So they gave the child to that servant. Paris was then raised by a herdsman. And as an adult, he is recognized and he came back to the city of Troy and he is reinstated as the Prince of Troy. And Cassandra also had prophecy about him before he went to Sparta. See, Cassandra is a visionary and she always have visions, but people ignored her thinking that she is crazy. So that's what happened. So here it says that even Cassandra had vision about the destruction, about the aftermath, or about the fall of Troy, especially before he is going to Sparta. Now, Helen, what's background of Helen? We need to know a bit more about Helen. Helen, or Helen of Troy, she's known as Helen of Troy, is actually the daughter of Zeus and Leda in Greek mythology. Although her putative father means acknowledged father was Tyndareus. So even though her acknowledged father was Tyndareus, she is considered as the daughter of Zeus and Leda. She was considered to be the most beautiful woman in the known world, as I told you before. Initially, she was abducted by the hero Theseus, who left her in the protection of his mother Athena while he was away adventuring. And later, a number of suitors tried to win her hand, and eventually Menelaus being the victor. So, got a lot of background for Helen. So many people loved her, and finally she got married to Menelaus, and she became the queen of Sparta. And then is the arrival of Paris, the Prince of Troy. As I told you before, Prince of Troy was visiting Sparta. He was actually visiting Sparta for the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. And the ceremony was actually organized by Zeus himself. So Paris actually came to attend that wedding. However, Eris, the goddess of discord, was not invited, and that angered her. Thus, she dropped a golden apple from the garden of Hesperides, on which the words "to the fairest" were engraved. And here comes the beauty contest that I told you before. The goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, they fought each other, and they said that they claimed that each one claimed that they or she is the fairest of all, and they fought for the apple, which was actually dropped from the garden of Hesperides, and they all wanted the apple. And it's at that time, Zeus trying to calm them, Zeus asked Paris to make a judgment. Okay, Paris, can you please be a judge? These goddesses are fighting each other. So Zeus Zeus asked Paris to make a judgment. And the goddess offered the young prince, various gifts. And that's how I told you Aphrodite actually promised Paris that if you select Aphrodite as the fairest, I would give you Helen. And that's how Helen was abducted by Paris and Helen was brought to Troy. So there are different versions. Some says that she actually eloped, some says that she was abducted. We don't know what is the truth. And you think about religion, ancient Greeks actually dedicated their lives to the gods. For them, gods was everything. They carrying out everything in the name of God, from drama festivals to war declarations. Let it be birth, marriage, or death, whatever it is, they always depended on God. Basically, for any aspect of their life, there was a god or goddess they could pray to. And temples were not like churches or mosques. They were more like tributes to the gods. Priests, they simply looked after cults. They did not constitute a clergy, and there were no sacred books. The sole requirement for the Greeks were to believe that gods existed and to perform ritual and sacrifice, through which the gods received their due. To deny the existence of a deity was actually to risk reprisals from the deity or from the mortals. So everyone in Greece actually respected and loved God. They prayed and invoked to God. Now, when you think about the gods, gods were polytheistic. Polytheistic, poly means many, polytheistic. They had almost 12 Olympic gods. Athenian citizens believed in many deities or gods. And the three most powerful gods were actually Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. And we are actually seeing most of these gods in Women of Troy. Lesser gods dealt with more specific daily issues. And these gods were believed to descend from Mount Olympus and dwell among the humans. Sometimes they even have children with them. So gods were very flawed. They could be kind, mean, angry, pleasant, cruel, loving, vain, and jealous. They fell in love, argued, and stole from each other. So they were very flawed. One rule for the gods and another for mortals it was. If a mortal broke a moral rule, then the punishment was severe. So generally the ancient Greeks, they would consider something bad in their lives as a punishment from God. And you could see that, you could hear a lot of that in Women of Troy. They are saying that this is a punishment from God. So they believed so. So a sense of respect and fear about the gods, but it's not expected that the gods will do the same to the human beings. And the gods, we could see gods as jealous, we could see gods as selfish and untrustworthy as well. So we got many gods here, gods and goddesses. Hades, Poseidon, Zeus, and there are so many. I'll deal with each one bit more specifically. Hades was actually Zeus and Poseidon's elder brother. Although a god of Mount Olympus, Hades rarely left his dark kingdom. He comes from the underworld where he ruled over the dead. And because he represented death, Hades was the most feared of the ancient Greek gods. Some people even refused to say his name because they were so scared. Hades was aided in the underworld by his three-headed dog, and you could see that in the picture. While he is cold and holds grudges, compared to the antics of the other gods, he is not a bad guy, really. Poseidon, you are actually seeing Poseidon in Women of Troy. Poseidon is the god of sea and earthquake. Although one of the gods of Mount Olympus, he spent most of his time in the ocean. His weapon is actually trident, which was said to be so powerful, and it could even shake the earth and shatter any object. And he had a bad reputation for being bad-tempered and moody, and would seek revenge on those who angered him. So considering that Greece is a collection of islands, it is so easy to see why he is so important to them, because it's a collection of seas and Poseidon plays an important role in their life. Zeus was the king of gods, most powerful, and he was the god of sky and thunder and controlled the weather, and you could see that in the background of the picture. He had different powers, the most famous being the ability to hurl lightning bolts at those who displeased him. He hated dishonesty and would punish those who lied or broke promises, and yet he was also infamous adulterer. He frequently tricked women into sleeping with him and was known to rape mortals and abandon to his wife's jealousy fury. Hera was Zeus's wife and queen of the gods. She represented the ideal woman and was goddess of women, marriage, and family. The oldest and most important temples of Greece were built in her honor. However, she was perhaps most famous for her jealous and vengeful nature, definitely being a woman, especially against her husband's lovers and their illegitimate offspring. Athena, also referred to as Athene is a very important goddess for many things. She is actually the goddess of wisdom, courage, inspiration, civilization, law and justice, strategic warfare, so many things. She's known most specifically for her strategic skills in warfare and is even portrayed as comparison of heroes and is the patron goddess of heroic endeavor. So she was said to be Zeus's favorite daughter, Athena. Aphrodite, we already heard a lot about Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty. Despite her marriage to Hephaestus, Aphrodite had many lovers. Her lovers include both gods and men, including the god Ares, god of war. While she's beautiful, her personality is described as very weak and frightened, as well as vain, ill-tempered, and easily affected. Dionysius, definitely you know about Dionysius, god of wine, wine making, etc. Because wine is a major part of the ancient Greek culture, and Dionysius as a result played an important and he's a very popular figure in mythology, often called the liberator, because his wine, music, and ecstatic dance freed his followers from self-consciousness and the restraints of society. Unlike the immortal gods, who were often hostile towards human beings, Dionysius was benevolent towards humankind. So gods and goddesses, that's just a slide which gives you gods and goddesses. There's a plot narrative arc here, and you could look into that later on by yourself, which is the exposition and what is the rising action and climax and denouement of the play Women of Troy. We've got some key facts about the Trojan women, you can look into that. Characters, I've given some characters. Priam, as I told you, king of Troy. Hecuba is the queen. Paris is the son. Hector is another son. Andromache is Hector's wife. Polyxena is daughter of Priam and Hecuba. Cassandra is the other daughter of Hecuba and Priam. And when you think about Spartans, we have got Menelaus as the king of Sparta, and queen is Helen. Agamemnon is Menelaus' brother, leader of the Greek armies that actually fought Troy. And he's the one who is actually selecting Cassandra as his prize of war. And we got Zeus, king of the Greek gods. We got Hera, wife of Zeus. We got Tynanteres, as I told you, a Spartan king and father of Helen. And some characters mentioned in the play. There are so many characters. Phoebus, also known as Apollo, is one of the Olympian deities in Greek and Roman mythology. Chalcideus, we are seeing him. He is a Greek messenger who is actually informing the Trojan women of what actually happens to them. Odysseus, as I told you before, king of Ithaca. And Neoptolemus, another Greek warrior and son of the warrior Achilles. And he's the one who claims Andromache as his slave. And Achilles, very famous Greek warrior. Characters mentioned more. Deiphobus, Trojan warrior. Epheus is the one who built the Trojan horse. You could see that in the prologue. Ajax, son of Peleus, he's the one who is raping Cassandra. Ganymede, son of Laomedon, an early king of Troy and the father of Priam. Peleus, king of Myrmidons. So there are so many references of characters as well. So you can look into this. Some places mentioned: Sparta, as I told you, prominent city-state. Argos, the Greek city. So there are different names. Athens, another Greek city. Hellas, transliteration of the word that the ancient Greeks used as a name for their own country, Greece. Phrygia is another name for Turkey, another name for Troy. Ilium is another name for Troy. Arcadia is a region in South Central Asia, Greece. Delos is a Greek island. Euboea is another Greek island. And the last slide is all about inhabitants. Achaean means inhabitants of Achaea. Argive means people living in Argos or inhabitants of Argos. So I hope this long slide, 55 slides, I hope this will give you a good background information related to the text written by Euripides, the Women of Troy. Hope this will give you some idea about all the different background informations in the context.